We'll do the flag salute. One.
Dangerous place for AOC to be. The Democratic Party doesn't tolerate dissent, and Nancy Pelosi now should be for revenge. Monica Crowley is the former Assistant Treasury Secretary.
Okay, I'm going to take the roll call. Mr. Feitros, Mr. Gibbons,
Here.
Mr. Gomes,
Here.
Mrs. McNeil,
Here.
Dr. Martinez,
Here.
Mrs. Orth, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Vasselli, Mr. Cathcart.
I'm here and happy belated birthday.
Thank you to you too. And President Fernandez.
Here. Happy belated birthday as well. Mrs. Orth.
Oh, Michelle is here, okay. There's present Carrie Grabstein, School Business Administrator, Dr. Barry Haynes, Acting Superintendent of Schools, and Tasmin Weisberger, our presenter.
Hi, I'm here. I also need screen sharing capabilities.
We just have a motion to open the public meeting.
I'll move to open the meeting.
Second.
And Tasmin, I'll go ahead and introduce you if that's okay,
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
after the opening.
The Ridgefield Park Board of Education Open Public Meetings Act Statement. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Ridgefield Park Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted in the Bergen Record, Municipal Building, Board of Education offices, and district website. Public participation instructions. Public participation will be conducted both in person and virtually through Zoom. All public will be muted throughout the meeting. Public participation comments are limited to 5 minutes. The public will be able to both speak and be seen by the board when participating virtually or telephonically via Zoom. Individuals participating virtually that wish to make comments during public participation will need to raise their hand by clicking the blue hand icon at the bottom of their Zoom window. Individuals participating by telephone that wish to make comments during public participation will need to hit *9 on their telephone to raise their hand. The business administrator, board secretary will then unmute individuals one at a time to speak in the order their hand was raised.
Go ahead. Yeah. Welcome to tonight's board meeting. So this is a board retreat instead of a meeting. And I look at this as a great educational opportunity. We have in our midst Ms. Tasmin Weisgerber, and she's renowned in the state for her presentations on the new comprehensive health and phys ed standards. She'll go ahead and present that in a context tonight with the updated 2020 comprehensive health and phys ed standards. Those are available online at the New Jersey Department of Education. Tasmin gave us permission to record this Zoom presentation tonight, which we are doing. I approach this retreat as an educational opportunity, as I said, one that provides our trustees with an opportunity to learn about the new standards and to have a little bit of discussion. For the public comment portion of this meeting, Dr. Martinez will be reading the protocols as usual for public comment after Tasmin's presentation. And then I will be accepting questions via this form, which is posted here, and I'll post it on the screen after Tasmin's presentation. with the intention of publishing a question and answer website by the end of July for the questions that you have here locally or from the public online. Further, I'd like to announce that our Health and Phys Ed department is currently working to complete the K-12 curriculum, which we will have available before the beginning of the school year. And Ms. Weisgerber, thanks again for appearing with us. You have the
Thank you.
floor.
Thank you. All right, let me get my PowerPoint up. Great. So thank you everyone for joining me tonight. I do want to apologize ahead of time. I am sick, so there may be points where I need to mute myself and cough. So I apologize ahead of time. So tonight we're going to be talking about the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. My name's Tasmin, or Taz Weisgerber. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Manager, although I'm also Interim Executive Director at Answer, which is a national nonprofit. We are housed within Rutgers University in New Jersey, and we have been around for over 40 years, providing professional development for teachers and educators across the country who provide sex education, as well as providing comprehensive sex education to youth across the country and around the world as well. A little bit about my background. I am a certified health teacher in New Jersey for K through 12 students. I'm a nationally certified health education specialist, and I've been in the sex education field for about 10 years now. So the goals of this presentation are to introduce the process of revising the learning standards, as many folks are not aware of how that process happens. We're going to talk a little bit about comprehensive sex education and what that encompasses, some rationale behind it. And then we're going to talk about a few of the learning standards which have been introduced for the 2020 standards, which will be implemented in the upcoming school year. We are not going to be covering all of them, as there are many. But again, as they mentioned, you can find that on the New Jersey Department of Education website. So the standards are updated about every 5 years in New Jersey, and the updates happen for all subject areas, not just for health and phys ed. And how it works is the New Jersey Department of Education recruits professionals from around the state. The professionals provide their input on what they think should be updated, what they think should be added, and then the Department of Education ultimately gets to figure out which of those they want to implement. Once it's been approved, the standards are provided to all school districts to implement, and then the school districts get to decide where in each grade band they want to teach each of those performance indicators, which are also some people just call the learning standards. So for example, in the grade band for K through 2, the school district gets to decide whether they want to implement that in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade. They also get to decide how they want to teach it. So they get to choose which lesson plan, they get to create their own lesson plan, or choose a curriculum which encompasses many lesson plans that cover the different standards that need to be implemented. So school districts really do get to choose how they want to teach it, and it's very different across the state based on the needs of each district. And then the Department of Education has issued a clarification on 3 of these different learning standards. There will be no further review or adaptations to these standards. So for this last round of updates, there were over 100 districts, nonprofit organizations, agencies, as well as the military represented on that team, which was comprised of teachers, school leaders, folks in higher education, as well as those that are part of charter and non-public schools from urban, suburban, and rural communities. And you can see those represented on the map in the middle. And 88% of the participants had a master's degree or higher. So they really tried to find a diverse group of educators and folks with expertise in this area to make sure that we are implementing the best practices and the most up-to-date information so that our young people have access to the information and skills that will help them to live healthier lives. Also these two slides that I'm showing are directly from the Department of Education presentation that they provided. And so I really love this slide where it says standards for a rapidly changing world, because that's really, it couldn't be further from the truth. Our world is changing so much, and a lot of it has to do with technology and young people's access to technology, whether it be social media, the internet, through cell phones, through games and tablets. There are many ways where young people now have access to way more information than any of us had in any previous generation. And they're accessing this information at younger and younger ages. So we need to make sure that we are keeping up with that and giving young people the information and the skills to help navigate this new rapidly changing world. Now we're going to cover a little bit of research on teens and sex. So this graph is from the CDC's National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is administered every 2 years across the country in almost every state. So this is the New Jersey specific data, and this is high school only. They do also provide this data in middle school, but I wasn't given a chance to combine them. So this is high school specific. So you can see here from the 2019 data that the amount of young people who shared that they had had sexual intercourse for the first time before they were even 13, so 12 or younger, was almost 3%. So over 1,300 young people who chose to respond to that question shared that they had had sex for the first time before they were 13. So that's quite a significant number. That there were more than 7% who responded that they had had intercourse with 4 or more people during their lifetime so far before being surveyed. More than 24% of youth were currently sexually active, meaning that they had had sex with at least one person in the 3 months prior to being surveyed. And more than 36% did not use a condom during the last time that they were sexually active. And you can see that those numbers are very different from females and males, with males stating 30% and females being 43%. And that's often due to the fact that young women will often be coerced into behaviors by older partners. And so that could account for the difference in condom use. But what you can see by just these few questions out of the many that are asked on this survey is that our young people are sexually active. They're sometimes sexually active from a very young age, and they may not necessarily be making the healthiest decisions for themselves. So we need to make sure that we are providing them the information and the skills to hopefully make those better decisions for themselves before they have the opportunity to engage in those sexual behaviors. A little bit more research. The average age that young people first view pornography is about 11 to 13. So that means that about half of people will see pornography for the first time before that age, and about half will see it after that age. New research that just came out also showed that about half of 11 to 13-year-olds shared that they had already viewed pornography, whether intentionally or accidentally stumbling across it. More than 60% of teens will have had vaginal intercourse by the time they turn 18. So about the time they graduate high school, more than half of teens will have had sex. And we know that today's youth view oral sex as a less risky option and often don't consider it to be sex at all, even though it is. And so the research there shows that half of teens within the 15 to 19 age category have engaged in oral sex. So you can see that that's many more youth because it's all of the folks that are 15 to 19 all have already engaged in oral sex, compared to by the time they turn 18, more than half will have had vaginal sex. So our youth are engaging in oral sex at younger ages, and it's more common than engaging in vaginal sex. We also know that there is a lot of misinformation on the internet, on social media, and that they're getting from their peers. So you may be wondering why I have a photo of blue waffles on the screen. So I learned when I first started providing sex education many years ago that I had to start talking about blue waffle when I talked about sexually transmitted infections, STIs or STDs, however you may know them, because blue waffle was a very made up, very fake STD that went viral on the internet. And many teens believed that it was an STD that they could contract and that it would turn their genitals bright blue, much like the color on the screen. And so I had to share with the young people that this was not a real infection and they could not contract it. And some of them almost didn't want to believe me. And they'd say, no, miss, it's new. You probably haven't heard about it yet. And I had to assure them that I had, done my due diligence. I'd done my research, and this was not an infection that they could contract. So if young people are willing to believe that blue waffle is a real STD that they could contract that can turn their genitals bright blue, what else are they believing that they see on the internet, which could be more believable than this? So we really need to make sure that we are combating the misinformation that they are learning and providing them with the correct information and skills to make those healthier decisions. And we're going to talk a little bit about comprehensive sex education. So I may be biased, however, I feel that comprehensive sex education could be the single most important topic that is taught in schools, because it's the only class that you will use every single day for the rest of your life. Because the topics and the skills that are covered in comprehensive sex education are things that you use every single day. And these are just some of the many topics that are covered. So abstinence is covered, and in New Jersey, it is required to stress abstinence whenever you're talking about anything sexuality related. We also talk about how to prevent pregnancy and STIs, better communication skills, refusal skills, how to say no to sex or drugs or alcohol, whatever it may be. How to tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships, and how to get out of unhealthy relationships or help a friend who may be in an unhealthy relationship. We talk about sexual orientation and gender identity and the differences that can be found there. We also talk about consent, what it is and what it isn't. We also talk about self-esteem, how you can have a better, more positive self-esteem, as well as better body image. And what many people don't realize is that self-esteem and body image is linked to sexual behaviors. So what research shows is that when young people have lower self-esteem, when they don't feel as great about themselves, they're more likely to engage in sexual behaviors at an earlier age, and they're more likely to engage in riskier behaviors. So perhaps not using condoms, not using contraception, things like that. So if we're able to increase the self-esteem of our young people, it helps to push back the onset of sexual behaviors and encourages them to use or choose healthier decisions when they do become sexually active. We also know that there are more than 140 national organizations that have provided statements in support of comprehensive sex education, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, as well as the National School Board Association, and many, many more. And that is because we all have the same shared goals for our young people. We want them to feel safe, whether that's in school, on their way to or from school, and as well as outside of school. We want them also to feel welcome and like they belong in school or with their peers. We also just want them to feel happy. And we know that by providing comprehensive sex education, it helps our young people to be safe, feel more welcome, and be happier. Did I skip one? No, okay. We also want to acknowledge that it takes a village when we talk about sex education with young people. Schools are not meant to replace parents. It truly should be a partnership where schools provide facts and families provide values. However, there are some times where values are discussed in sex education because that's the nature of sex education. But when values conversations do happen, or when young people ask values-based questions, teachers should be trained to be values neutral and explore a range of values. So their response could look something like, some people feel this way, Some people feel that way, and it's up to you and your family to discuss where your values are in regards to that topic. That way, everyone's values in the classroom are being expressed, and you're also encouraging the young people to have those conversations with their parents and family members. Research also shows that although young parents will always be a young person's first sex educator, that's always going to be true. Unfortunately, many parents and families don't have the important conversations with their children that need to happen. Sometimes they do have some conversations, but don't have all of the conversations. And some simply have the conversations too late, after young people have either already experienced abuse or already engaged in sexual behaviors. So that's where schools are able to step in and provide that education when families aren't providing it, or where families aren't providing enough education. This also comes into play and is very important in regards to preventing child abuse, particularly sexual abuse, because a large percentage, a majority of the time when young people are being sexually abused, it's often by a family member or a close loved one. And so oftentimes they're definitely not getting the education that they need in order to prevent or stop that abuse. So schools really need to be there to help those young people in those situations. And now we're going to talk a little bit about inclusivity, since there are some standards that promote more inclusivity in the sex education classroom, and some folks have had questions about that. So this data here is from a couple national surveys that were provided to LGBTQ youth, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer youth. And so the first set of data shows that 60% of the youth who were surveyed shared that they felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation. So they did not feel safe walking into their own school building simply because of an identity that they hold. So you can imagine if they don't feel safe walking into school, it's probably not a great place for them to learn much if you don't feel safe where you're at, if they even decide to show up to school at all. And we know that young people who identify as LGBTQ have much higher rates of absences for this exact reason. They don't feel safe going to school, so they simply don't go. And so you can imagine that has a big impact on not only their mental health, but also their school attendance rate, their grades, their GPAs, and the rest of their school career. The other statistics showed that 42% of the LGBTQ youth had seriously considered suicide in the year prior to being surveyed. Almost half of the youth. That is a very high statistic. It's about double to quadruple the rate of non-LGBTQ students. So some people may see this number and assume that it's because youth identify that way that they have considered suicide. But we know that that's actually not true. So when youth have access to spaces that are affirming of their orientation and gender identity, they report lower rates of depression, suicidal ideations, suicide attempts, and self-harm than those who do not. So we know that it is the environment that young people who are LGBTQ are in. If they are in a welcoming space where they feel safe and affirmed and they're not being bullied, they have much lower rates of suicide and self-harm than youth who are in environments where they do not feel safe, where they're being bullied or they can't be their true selves. So if school can be possibly that one space where young people can feel safe and affirmed, we can quite literally save young people's lives. And I think that that's something really amazing that schools can be able to do. These are the sources where I got that data from. And then we also know that when young people are educated about the diversity of sexual orientations, gender identities, as well as gender expression, which is the way that we express ourselves outwardly, and when we have inclusive school environments, it helps to reduce depression, reduce suicidal ideations and attempts, lowers alcohol and marijuana consumption, reduces absences, and increases GPA scores, not just for our LGBTQ youth, but it's proven to improve all of these outcomes across all identities. So even youth who do not identify as LGBTQ, they see these positive outcomes as well when we provide this education and make school a safer space. So when we make school a safer space for some, we in fact make the school safer for all. All right, so now we're going to get into the new health standards and the rationale behind some of them. I do have a couple notes before that though. So before we begin, I wanted to share that most of the content in the new 2020 standards is not new. So there are some new standards. However, most of them are not new. So you can go online and see the 2014, which was the last time they were updated, those standards, as well as the 2020 standards. And you'll see that most of them are the same or have only been changed a few words or so. Some topics have also already been in the standards. They were simply expanded upon. So there's more standards that relate to the same topic. And then the two areas where there is actually new content are mostly around LGBTQ inclusivity and child abuse prevention. And so we'll be covering those tonight. I also wanted to share that the revisions, the updates for the standards this round have been experiencing pushback as opposed to the revisions of many different years, simply because of media attention and a disinformation campaign. And this is something that's been happening across the country. New Jersey is not the only state that's been having this disinformation campaign. The many states across the country have been targeted, and they are, folks are specifically sharing or intentionally sharing misinformation in order to advance their own agenda. And again, I won't be covering every single new standard, but they are available online. And then I wanted to remind us to take off our adult lenses. And so what I mean by that is, since we are adults, we have experience and knowledge about sexuality that is much, much, much different than young people's, particularly in elementary school. So sometimes when we see certain standards, sometimes we as adults can actually be the ones that are over-sexualizing some of the standards that actually aren't about sex at all. So for example, one of the standards we'll be talking about tonight is in reference to informing young people about the names of their body parts, including their genitals. So we as adults can sometimes think of genitals and we automatically assume that there's a correlation to sex. Where for young people that are, 5 to 7 years old, it's simply their body parts or the body part that they may urinate from. They have no concept of, of sexuality or sex at that young age. And so they aren't, correlating learning about their body parts to sex at that age. So we need to just try to put ourselves in the mindset of a young person when we look at these standards. All right, so this is the first standard that we're going to look at. So this is in the K through 2 grade band. So again, this would be taught in either kindergarten, first grade, or second grade. And it's exactly what I was just talking about, that we need to list medically accurate names for body parts, including the genitals. And so the reason for this is for child abuse prevention. So there was a study done in the 90s that proved that some sex offenders will choose to avoid youth who know proper terminology for their body parts. That's because they know that when young people have that correct terminology, it's more likely that they're in a family where they have a close connection with a trusted adult, that they have likely already been taught the difference between safe and unsafe touch. And they know that they're much more likely to get caught if they choose to abuse that young person. So to save themselves the hassle, they will choose a young person who's more naive about their body parts and about what's okay and what's not okay, because they're much less likely to be caught. This can also be helpful for young people who are currently being abused, because not only are young people going to need to know the names of those body parts, there are also several other standards which talk about different types of abuse and talk about trusted adults that they can talk to if abuse is occurring. So in order for the young person to be able to share that abuse and have the trusted adult understand what that abuse is occurring, they need to be able to use proper terminology. So there's a story that some of you may have heard of. This woman is an adult now. However, she shares how when she was younger, she unfortunately was being abused by someone. And she tried to share that that abuse was occurring with her teacher while she was in elementary school. But the term that she knew for her private parts was cookie. And because that's what she had been taught at home and what she used at home. And so she told her teacher that her uncle was licking her cookie, or her uncle had licked her cookie. And the teacher, hearing that sentence, said something to the effect of, "I'm so sorry. I hope you were able to, get another cookie," something along those lines. It wasn't until later in the school year when the mother of that child came in and was asking some, questions about the young person, and the parent used that same terminology, that the teacher was able to put two and two together and realize that cookie was the euphemism for her privates, for her vulva, or for her vagina. And so at that point, they were finally able to figure out that there was abuse occurring and stop that abuse from happening. So that young person had to endure months of abuse when that abuse could have been stopped much earlier if that young person simply knew the correct terminology to use to let that teacher know that it was happening. So that's just one example of why young people need to know the names of their genitals. The American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends that when you are teaching young people the names of all of their body parts, that you include the terminology for their genitals. So even before they can walk or talk, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends teaching young people the names of their private parts. And again, when we educate young people about the names of their sexual anatomy at an early age, it also helps to normalize talking about their bodies and reduces their risk for sexual abuse. These two standards are also part of the K through 2 grade band, so they'll be implemented in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade. And they state that we need to discuss how individuals make their own choices about how to express themselves, and discuss the range of ways that people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. So the core idea here is that every individual has unique skills and qualities, which can include the activities they enjoy, how they may dress, their mannerisms, and things they like to do. The purpose is that so that all individuals feel welcome and included. So many people are misinterpreting the purpose of these standards. These standards have nothing to do with LGBTQ youth. This is simply to prevent bullying from happening and discussing things like, boys can have long hair and we shouldn't bully them for it. Girls can play with fire trucks and we shouldn't bully them for it. Anybody can be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher when they grow up. It's not based on your gender. So those are the things that are talked about in this age range. This is not talking about transgender youth or anything related to LGBTQ youth. This standard is in the 3 through 5 grade band. So this will be implemented in 3rd grade, 4th grade, or 5th grade. And it states to explain common human sexual development and the role of hormones. For example, romantic and sexual feelings, masturbation, mood swings, and timing of pubertal onset. So whenever there is a standard that has parentheses with certain examples, those examples are purely examples. Those are not part of the requirement for the standard to be taught. So schools do not have to teach about masturbation in order to implement this standard. It is simply an example of a possible topic that can be included. So this is really meant to normalize the changes that are occurring during puberty so that young people can understand what to expect and realize that some of the changes or feelings they may be having are completely normal. And again, this topic is not new. It is simply expanded upon since puberty has been part of the health standards for many years now. And then these are also part of the 3 through 5 grade bands, so 3rd grade, 4th grade, or 5th grade. And they state to describe gender role stereotypes and their potential impact on self and others, differentiate between sexual orientation and gender identity, and demonstrate ways to promote dignity and respect for all people. For example, these many different identities that people may hold. So the core idea here is that all individuals and families should feel welcome and included, regardless of their gender, gender expression, or sexual orientation. So for the second standard here, differentiating between sexual orientation and gender identity, those definitions at this age can be very simple. Sexual orientation is who you like, who you love, who people start a family with. And gender identity is how you feel inside about your gender. So they're very simple, age-appropriate definitions, and they're meant to, again, make everyone feel welcome and reduce bullying of young people who may identify in different ways, and as well as families, because we know that in every school there are families that have parents who are same-sex or have, other siblings and things like that, who may identify as somewhere along the LGBTQ spectrum. And then for the third standard there, that really is showing ways to promote dignity and respect for all people of all identities. That one is not specific to LGBTQ youth. As you can see, there's differing abilities, family configuration, immigration status. There are many different identities that are included as part of that standard. And then the last standard that we're going to be covering is in the 6th through 8th grade band. So this would be covered in 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade. And it states to define vaginal, oral, and anal sex. So as I mentioned earlier, New Jersey does have a statute that requires programs to stress abstinence when discussing sex education. So, whenever these discussions are being had, abstinence is discussed as the only 100% effective way to prevent contracting STIs. But the purpose of defining these sexual behaviors and including this in the standards is because we need to make sure that young people understand what is being discussed. When educators talk about STIs or STDs, which they have for many years been talked about in the middle school grade, they need to talk about how you can contract STIs. And so young people have been learning that you can contract STIs through vaginal, oral, and anal sex in middle school for many years now. So even though this standard is new, the topic is not new to middle school health education. And the reason it needs to be defined is that young people may only know these sexual behaviors through the slang terminology that they may use with their friends or they might have seen online. So the purpose of defining it is to make sure that everyone's on the same page when you're talking about these things, and so that the education doesn't go over the young person's head. It's also helpful so that young people can understand their bodily autonomy and that they have a right to say no to these sexual behaviors, so that they can properly evaluate the risk associated with engaging in those behaviors, particularly if they're being coerced into engaging in those behaviors, perhaps by someone saying that oral sex or anal sex is a safer way to engage in these behaviors because you can't get pregnant from them. So they need to understand what these behaviors are and that you can contract STIs from them. And if there is abuse that occurs, that young people will be able to accurately describe that abuse that has occurred. As I mentioned, this is not a new topic being discussed in middle school. It is simply a new standard that has been added. And then for comprehensive sex education in general, which is, all of the many standards that are incorporated in the 2020 standards, studies prove that comprehensive sex education delays initiation of sexual intercourse, decreases the frequency of sexual intercourse, decreases the number of sexual partners, reduces risk-taking, and increases the use of condoms and contraception. So when we provide young people with the education and the skills before they possibly engage in these behaviors, they can have these positive outcomes. They wait longer to have sex. They have fewer sexual partners. We have fewer STIs and unwanted pregnancies by providing this information and sex education. New Jersey is an opt-out state, so all parents and guardians have the ability to opt their child out of any part of health that goes against their values. So there could be specific topics that you can choose to opt out of if you choose to do so. The opt-out procedure is not new. It has been around since the 1980s. Schools will provide guidance sometime around the beginning of the school year or sometime before your child has some type of health or sex education. There will be no consequences for any student that is opted out of any part of health. It will not affect their grade at all. And they should be provided alternate work that's relevant to the class, but not the topic that they are being opted out of. So maybe it's about the topic that you were learning earlier in the week or the week before, but not the topic they're being opted out of. And this is a list of resources from where I got the data and information throughout the presentation. And that concludes my presentation. So I'm ready to open it up for questions.
I have a question, if I can ask. So who will be teaching this curriculum? Will it be the classroom teacher or the health teacher?
So Tasmin, let me go back to some of the things I said at the beginning of the presentation too. First of all, thank you. And for me to put, again, the context of Taz's presentation today was to educate our board and to educate the public in understanding why the standards were put together, what the demands of the school district are, and how we proceed with that information to craft our own curriculum that meets the needs of our individual community, which is currently taking place. I again say that we have a question and answer page that we will be publishing. If you want to get that tiny URL, it's tinyurl phys ed. There, it's up on the screen now, thank you. And if members either locally or online have questions, they can go ahead and submit a question there, because I think that does the professionals who are teaching this in our district, which Mrs. Rodriguez will be the health and phys ed teachers. I think that does them a service to go ahead and research your questions and come up with good answers, and we can publish a question and answer website online. I'd also say that members of our community who have demonstrated an interest and questions about this curriculum have asked if they can participate in that. And our health and phys ed department is currently crafting that curriculum, and we will be planning a date, I'm thinking mid-August, when we will welcome public participation to come in, review the curriculum, and talk through the opt-out process. Okay, so Mrs. Rodriguez, I hope that answered your question, but go ahead and ask it again.
That answered my question. Thank you, Dr. Haynes.
Mrs. Weisberg, will you be available now for other questions?
I thought we were submitting questions,
Agreed, yes.
but I will hang around for a little while to listen if there are any questions that are asked in person.
Can I just ask, for curiosity's sake, so you stated at the beginning that there was, well, one of the reasons we had you in was there's an opportunity for miscommunication. Is there an example that you have about that miscommunication about the state standards or what we're expected to do?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of misinformation that I've been reading in news articles or social media posts. Some of them have to do with what the state is required. So some folks think that there are particular lessons or videos that have to be shown according to the Department of Education. The Department of Education does not require any particular lessons or curriculum or videos. That is, again, up to the school district to decide. As long as the lesson addresses the standards, then they're in compliance. As well as many people who are under the assumption that teachers may take content from a like, let's say the 6th through 8th grade band and choose to teach it in kindergarten. And that's absolutely not the case. Teachers definitely don't want to be teaching things that are age or developmentally inappropriate. And the folks who are teaching this are going to be people who have health education certification, have training in this area, or were grandfathered in as elementary school teachers. So I just really want to remind folks that if you read something that seems a bit preposterous or seems like, I can't believe my school would be, teaching this to young people, then it's likely that it's not happening. So there is a lot of misinformation that's out there, and some of it is, if some of the things that were being stated in the newspapers was really true, I myself would be concerned as well. So a lot of things that you're seeing are not really things that are happening, unfortunately. So if you do see something and have a question, it's best to always bring it to your school district and ask about the validity of whatever you may have seen.
So, and I asked Ms. Weisgerber to stay online so she could listen to some of these questions. So when we post the answers online, she would also have input. But I'm also thrilled. I do want to recognize that we have Mr. Ramonde, who's our athletic director and also spearheads the curriculum, also present, so he can listen to the questions and be a professional representative as we craft answers and move forward with our curriculum revisions. And I kick it back to the president.
Take this time to open it up for public comment.
Ms. Schmidt, since you're standing at the podium.
I forgot.
He has to read the thing.
Good evening. Before we begin public comment, as the chair of the policy committee, I wanted to remind everyone that we will continue to have 2 public comment periods. Oh, 1, sorry. For tonight, 1. Neither one is, I guess the one is off agenda items. There's a sign-up sheet at the podium. We will call your name in the order that you sign in. Each member of the public will have 5 minutes to speak during each comment period. Time cannot be transferred to other individuals. And thank you for your cooperation and support.
Ms. Schmidt?
I know I'm out of order. Janet's before me. It's just that I have 2 very simple questions, but I really wanted to address them to Taz because before her time is up. The rest I can, come back and address to the board.
Name and address.
What's that?
Name and your address.
I'm going to give just my first name tonight, Jenny. I keep my pronouns a mystery and my address and my last name a mystery tonight because the NJEA has a hit list they're forming as we speak. My question really quick for Taz was this, she stated about this study that, shows a direct correlation between children who can correctly identify their private parts at an early age and a reduction in sexual abuse of minors. I'd just like to know if she can provide either to Dr. Haynes or right now, the exact name of that study.
I can just state, so I know I'm not answering any questions, but I can provide all of my resources that were used for tonight. I will send those to Dr. Haynes for you all.
Okay, because I've seen the presentation before and I've looked for this study, having trouble finding that one. And then my only other question, again, this was from a different presentation that you had given and it's available online. You discussed disinformation and you gave an example, like people were saying that we were showing, the sex ed curriculum was showing porn to elementary school students. What was interesting, and then, it said, no, that's not what we're doing. But really my question is, number one, it said, we're not showing it to elementary school students. I think we should clarify, we're not showing porn to elementary school students or high school students. We're not showing porn at all. What is the definition of porn in your opinion? You're an expert. That's my other question for Taz. She doesn't have to answer it now, but that's my question.
Okay, that's great. Mrs.
That's
Schmidt,
all.
thank you. And we
Janet
will
can go
post
now.
that on, line.
Mrs. Malou?
I'm sorry, Carrie, can I just speak to the first question? Only because I've worked with sexually abusive juveniles and sexually abused kids. I used to run a DIFUS program and still do some consulting. And the first thing we do when a child is abused and they start treatment is do sex education, in particular of their body parts and of sexual function, because it allows them to describe what happened better. And as it's pretty well established in my field, at least, that kids knowing their body parts, the proper names for them, and labeling them as their private parts, but in particular knowing the words, helps them describe abuse when it happens, stop it earlier when it begins, and describe what happened to them much better. That's anecdotal. I know it's not a study, but having done this for a long time, that's the first thing we do.
So I need to add, thank you, Dr. Martinez, for volunteering to join our community input in August on the curriculum standards. I appreciate that. That was great.
Good evening, miss. How are you?
Janet Malul, 163 East Grand. And I'm a retired teacher, but I'm here also as a parent and as a resident. I sat most of the day revamping 4 pages of information as I went back and forth at the Amaze videos and the 3 R's. Some of them I found very confusing in that the Amaze videos are all like comic styled. So what age is that really meant for? Because I look at them and I could see a kindergartner looking at it through a 5th grader looking at it. And some things are very, in my mind, and will always be very inappropriate for K through 2 to be looking at, and somewhat inappropriate. You're shaking your head, Dr. Haynes. I guess it's an opinion.
No, I'm shaking my head because we blocked the Amaze website and the resources. Again, the district
so-
chooses the resources. I need to be very clear. I'm looking back
Okay,
to.
because
yes.
looking at the information from Taz's material that you can find online, that's one of the things that's there, is Amaze. The other thing is the 3 R's or 3RS. I don't know how it's really pronounced. That seems to go into actual lesson plans. And one of my main fears is that when you are revamping curriculum of this nature, if you are going to do the job right, you really have to start from what you have and look at what you need to add in. Something has to go. You can't just keep adding in because you won't have enough time in the appointed time to be able to teach things. So in that case, my concern with only a couple of weeks to write this curriculum for K through 12 is that we're going to be looking at canned programs. And if we start looking at these canned programs, there's a lot more in it than meets the eye. The other points you talked about opting out. Years ago, when the state tests first came in and they talked about opting children out of them, many of those children were told, come to school anyway, we'll have something constructive for you to do. And instead they were penalized and sat in classrooms in a lot of districts with their hands folded for 2 hours. The other problem with opting your child out is kids go to lunch. The kids that were in that class learning whatever it was for that lesson are now sitting with a child who didn't hear it from the start, maybe misinterpreting what they heard. And now you have just as big a problem as if that child had been sitting in that classroom. There's a lot of misinformation that goes on. The other issue in my mind is when you start teaching some of the topics which seem to be controversial, and that child goes home and starts talking about it to a parent or a sibling, and it is in direct conflict with what they are taught at home, it's the child that's caught in the middle. Who do they believe? Do they believe what their parent is telling them? Do they believe what their teacher is telling them? Why put kids in that kind of situation? again, it's the child that gets penalized because of the adults. I have to say, I'm a little surprised at some of the statistics that I heard. I taught in a district that has a little over 4,000 kids. I did the math today. In 32 years, I taught approximately 4,000 children during my career. One transgendered, and maybe about 5 gay students came out when they were in high school. So I don't know where these statistics are coming from at such a high level. I don't know, when I looked at the numbers that she quoted, was it really a very small segment of the population that it was based off of? I don't even think it was 2,000 kids. So how do you make blanket statements that 3% of a population is this or that? When we talk about inclusiveness in the classrooms, this was a very good point. And to that point, my question is, why is there so little emphasis right now within the classrooms for general things? We should be teaching tolerance, absolutely, but not just gender tolerance or racial tolerance, but tolerance of a lot more of other things. We've had children that are of Muslim descent. They celebrate Ramadan. A lot of them have issues with the rest of the population because they're made fun of or they don't understand it. I've had kids complain they wouldn't sit next to a student because they smelled. It happened to be the diet that they ate for their cultural situation. Or what about, children that come from other countries where girls especially don't have, there's no need to educate them. So as you move on with this, I really think you need to, I'm hoping that whatever is decided on is reasonable. And if not, what I really hope to see is that board members and Dr. Haynes have to teach a class of whatever the topic is to students and see what it's like to have to answer those questions that parents and teachers have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Reber?
Good evening, miss. How are you?
Good, I'm sorry. Wait. I did some. Wait, good. I'm gonna hold it, sorry. I can't do it. All right, good evening. My name is Luani Reber. I live in 133 Hudson Avenue, Ridgefield Park. Before I start, I want to say a comment about pornography when it has to do with psychiatry. It is well known in the psychiatry field that serial killers and rapists have been watching porn at a very young age. So this is one of the things I think pornography should not be normalized. Yes, we know it's theater, but it's a really bad theory of sex, not for kids. If a teacher or a school district has to carefully review a curriculum as to not choose a specific lesson plan, a specific video that will be inappropriate and psychological damaging for children, she will be teaching, we have a big problem here. What does it say about the curriculum? What about the persons of groups behind the writing of this curriculum? What does it say about the administration or the Board of Education of that particular district that wants to implement this questionable curriculum? We answer my own questions. If a teacher or a school has to do this, it means that the curriculum is not suited for children, that the person of group that wrote the curriculum do not understand children's psychology, or worse, that they are not really for the welfare of the children, but more like the opposite. They're after the emotional and psychological damage of children. Are we adults here, the adults here, lacking any knowledge or emotional or psychological skills because we did not have this controversial sex education in our classroom as we were growing up in first, second, or third grade? No, we are all well-rounded, professional, emotional, and psychological intelligent people. We're missing nothing. Actually, I do know that if I had lessons based on this age-inappropriate sexual curriculum during my first, second, or third grade, I might not be the person I am today. I would probably need therapy, psychological and emotional therapy. It's not appropriate. I am glad that when I was growing up, I had no worries about sex education, just about what game we were going to play during recess or what for lunch. Children have plenty of time to delve into these topics of sexuality. None of us ran out of time trying to figure out who we were or how our body works. Why are we doing this to children? Bringing age-inappropriate sexual material to them that could truly damage them emotionally or psychologically. You might say, well, there is nothing wrong or controversial in the new curriculum, nothing to worry about. Well, there is a reason why parents of this nation are in uproar against it. In both red and blue states. Let me read you some of the headlines of newspapers across the nation. And no, this is no misinformation. We're talking about reputable newspapers. Examples, New York Post, parents outraged over sexual history survey given to fifth graders. CBS News California, parents protest graphic sex ed curriculum changes to Cupertino School District. New York Daily News, national new sex ed curriculum in California causes uproar among parents who see it as too graphic. New York Post, New Jersey first graders to learn about gender identity in new sex ed lessons, too young to do that. Insider NJ, as parents react, more school districts will look to temper dubious sex education standards. Idaho News, new state sex ed curriculum teaching second graders about gender identity causes uproar. The Washington Free Beacon from Massachusetts, thousands of Massachusetts parents pull kids from woke sex education classes. And actually I have also the app in New Jersey, Tom's River supports parents' Bill of Rights on sex education curriculum. I actually have a quote from them. It says, we are going to speak as a board. We're going to send a statement about it. How it says, some of these lessons are completely inappropriate. So I ask you again, what does it say about a curriculum that contains very sexually inappropriate lessons that the school administrators and even teachers have to carefully review it? What kind of curriculum is this? Why would anyone want to implement such material? Are we going to leave our children's well-being in the single discernment of one person, a teacher, or even group of teachers who are not pediatricians, who are not doctors in psychiatry, nor doctors in psychology? When we visit a doctor, we may consider not just one, two, or third, or fourth opinion when we take a medical advice. Our children's welfare deserve the opinion and discernment of many, and especially the discernment of their parents. One thing to notice, they did have 88% of master's people involved in this curriculum, but they didn't really have doctors and pediatricians. Yeah, they might have approved it, but I'm sure to it that I did not read the whole thing. But especially parents of this state, parents of the town should have been included in this curriculum. We need to, our children deserve our values. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Miss.
Ms. Rios?
Good evening.
Hi. Olga Rios, 388 Main Street. All right, give me 1 second. All right, so I don't know her name, Ms. Taz. She mentioned that we as adults look to sexualize body parts. And I guess it's not a question, but in the 3 R's curriculum that she has mentioned in other presentations, the definition, the vagina is the canal leading from the vulva to the uterus. The average vaginal canal is 3 to 5 inches long and resembles a flattened tube with its wall touching each other. The vagina has great elasticity and can adjust to the size of a penis or allow a fully developed fetus pass from the uterus out of the body. So my question is, or my statement is, why does my second grader need to know that a vagina can fit, whatever size penis. It is not my children. I have a 3-year-old. He knows he has a penis. His sister has a vagina. We use proper terminology. They don't have, to know that it fits a particular size penis. And then she also mentioned that, the curriculum is up to each district and maybe each teacher. This leaves much leeway in the teacher's hands. The curriculum websites that she has presented in other presentations, 3Rs and sex-etc.org, are providing those definitions, and teachers are either willing to teach them or not. It's up to each teacher. So what is a teacher from Lincoln Schools, what's stopping a teacher at Lincoln School from teaching my soon-to-be second grader that specific definition, and maybe not a teacher at Grant? So, these are either standards for New Jersey that are, so important. They shouldn't be because they're inappropriate, but, regardless, if it's so dire for students to know these things, then why is it that so much is left up to each district or each teacher or each school? It's either, it's important or it's not. I don't think my kid would be allowed to opt out of math, but, he is allowed to opt out of this. So, it's either important or it's not. And my other thing, I would like, after the LGBTQ 60% or whatever slide, she showed another slide with like different studies. I would like to either see that slide again if possible, or if you guys could like post it somewhere so I could read more on it. And also I feel like, at least in Lincoln School, we have a really great guidance counselor. So for all those students who, are maybe feeling left out or who are feeling unhappy, Ms. Alkin is wonderful. I think that is also another, possibility where we can, they're already doing the social emotional learning where the students meet in groups, small groups. And I'm not a fan, but other people are. And I have heard that it really helps some students. So that's another option, where we could, I guess, compromise. Also, she also pointed out that a lot of families maybe don't talk about this kind of stuff. But it would also be a good idea to send projects home that can help, the families. That would also help increase the communication with, I guess, tough topics. One project, a marking period or whatever, that will help, actually, she said she wants this to be done by the parents. So that's another approach where, you send a project home and then the parents could also explain or, give as much details as, they're comfortable with their kids knowing. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Polito?
Can I just make a quick comment? I think the idea of educating our parents is an awesome idea. There are tons of online resources, there are programs, there are apps that can help, as a fellow parent who's, again, worked with sexually abused kids my entire adult life. When it was my turn to talk to my kids, I was sweating, I was tongue-tied, I thought I had it in the bag. My wife cheered me on and said, you're a psychologist, go in there and do it. And I was freaking out. So it really does help to have parents be able to talk these things, to say the words out loud, and to have that conversation with each other, parents, and laugh about it and giggle. And so that's a great idea. We should definitely do that. And the other thing I wanted to ask Dr. Haynes is, to your point, can we make sure that our mental health workers and school psychologists are available, not just in the curriculum writing process, but also to teachers who may be faced with a lesson they have to teach And when they get up in front of everybody, it's not a topic that was covered in their sex ed, that they have, developmentally appropriate information available to them.
Like, I think those are both good ideas.
For the record, they weren't mine, they were hers. For the record, they weren't my ideas, they were hers.
No, I know. So that I don't put you on the hot seat again about participating as the public, I would ask Ms. Weisgerber if you don't mind answering this question, because I do like these ideas a lot too. I think our community is very appreciative. And that's kind of where I and the board were hoping this discussion would go. What are some positive things that we as an educational learning community can do? I love the idea of a parents' night, of talking about tough topics with your kids. And Ms. Weisgerber, would you, could we hire you back for an informational service for our families, adults, to have difficult discussions with kids?
Absolutely. We have like general programs for parents and guardians on how they can be an askable adult or have conversations in general. And then we do also do more content specific topics as well. So yep, that's absolutely a service that we provide.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to build on Mrs. Polito's point. I think it's Ms. Rios, I'm sorry, regarding, us as parents having that opportunity to, bridge that gap using these learning materials. I think that's a great idea.
Ms. Schmidt?
Good
Yeah.
evening.
Good evening. All right, I'm a little all over the place now. Okay, we'll start with something I read in the 3 R's curriculum. This was a teacher's guide. So this is meant for the teachers, and it's specifically a supplement for students with disabilities and how to deal with those students in particular. And this is just a little portion that I read. And it said, parents and healthcare providers can be very helpful resources for young people, but a referral to a parent or medical provider can be highly stressful for youth with disabilities. Many people with disabilities are uniquely independent or uniquely dependent on parents and may be looking for another questions from students about disability and sexuality support outlet as the desire for independence grows in puberty. Additionally, parents and or caregivers may not be supportive of a young person's sexual development, which can make raising certain topics with parents and or providers feel unsafe for youth with disabilities. As a mother of a young little girl with multiple disabilities, how am I supposed to feel knowing there's a possibility her teachers are reading this from the 3 R's curriculum? Is this supposed to, establish a sense of trust between me and the teacher? Because to me, this just sounds like justification for the exact opposite. It sounds to me like a lot of, and I don't see statistics backing this up or anything. Maybe there are, I'd love to see them, but I don't see where statistically speaking, children with disabilities have these parents or caregivers that aren't capable of speaking to them or that they don't want to speak to, and it makes them feel unsafe. To me, that's really scary to think that like teachers have that assumption about a parent of a child with disabilities. And that's where the distrust starts to come from. And it's not disinformation, it's distrust. And it's, again, about the porn and the disinformation that's out there, as Taz mentioned. Just an example, this isn't to do specifically with the curriculum, the state standards, but just a couple months back during Pride Month, Ramsey High School featured books on a bookshelf for Pride. One of those books was Genderqueer. I looked it up for myself. I'm not listening to the media. I'm not listening to Facebook. I'm looking up, what is this book that everybody's talking about? What is the problem? I have it right here. To me, it's porn. No matter how you slice it, it should be illegal. It should not be allowed in a school, a high school, certainly not an elementary school. That's porn. That's not LGBTQ plus inclusivity, nothing. It's porn. I have it right here. I don't even feel comfortable handing it to you guys. And it's really difficult. I don't want to worry about what books are on display. We don't want to do this. Like, We want trust. We want transparency. I know you guys are trying, but it's really disheartening. And again, she didn't do the slide tonight, but there was a slide all about the parents and how to tell them it's no, 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 it's none of that. No, it is that. It is that because it's all intertwined. It's all about sidestepping parents. Don't trust your parents. We got this for you. You read it. You read it. You all giggle about it. Like it's appalling. Genderqueer doesn't belong in any library, and you have the national, I think it's the National Library Association, thinks it's great. We have to protect the books. The NJEA is coming after parents like me if we don't want these books. You need to stand up to that. You need to pay attention. You need to tell us what books are in our library. This one certainly doesn't belong there, and I'm going to make sure it's not in there. That's all.
Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Polito?
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Jay Sean Sadler, 139 Overpeck Avenue. First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Weisberger. That was a great presentation, very informative. And as a parent here, I just want to say that I really appreciate the information that you provided for all of us. I had an opportunity to read the standards for myself. And personally, I find them to be great. I think that they'll be very helpful to our community. I agree with pretty much everything that I've seen there. Sitting here listening to my neighbors and friends, I just wanted to just reflect on some of the things that I heard. So I think there seems to me to be some confusion regarding standards versus the curriculum. So the state is setting standards of just generally like what should be known for our children. And then as a community here, right, that would include the superintendent, principal, teachers, the board. I heard Dr. Haynes mention that there's going to be an opportunity for parents to review and reflect on curriculum and sometime in mid-August. So what I'm hearing is some of my neighbors and friends here are referring to curriculum as though it's already set, and that's just not factual. So the standards are what Ms. Weisberger has been going over, and the curriculum is something that as a community, we'll all have an opportunity to speak on and to review and reflect upon and figure out what works best for us as a community. And I think that that makes perfect sense. The other thing, so I did want to reflect, the word tolerance was used, and I think it's very, very important. My good friend, Miss Malou, who I have a lot of love for, mentioned that word tolerance. So I'd like to say, so for myself as a Black male, this word has been frequently used, racial tolerance. When you tolerate something, right? If I tolerate my child's behavior, it's not a very positive thing to just tolerate something. Like I don't want my existence to be tolerated, right? I want to be affirmed. I want to be welcomed. I want to be accepted, right? I want to be loved. And that's what I want for all of our children. So I think it's not just semantics. It's very important that we make that distinction between, tolerance, which I understand, Ms. Malou, what you were saying. I don't want to be, I don't want you to think I'm being overly critical of you, but it's very important to make that distinction. The book Genderqueer that my good friend Jenny mentioned, I have not seen the book myself, but I do want to take a strong look at it. I do feel that a lot of just Western American values, we kind of make taboos out of things, out of our body parts, out of sex. And as myself, I'm a guidance counselor. I also have done work in domestic violence. For a number of years, I was a domestic violence counselor. And in my experience, it does grave harm, particularly to young people, when they don't have basic literacy around their body and sex. I think it's important that we are able to have these conversations as a community. I think it's important that kids are informed and given the language that they need so that they can be educated themselves. They can describe their own experiences. And even as they speak to one another, their peers, they're having conversations that are informed. I think that that's very important. I think that think that was all. I want to thank everybody here. I think that this is a great opportunity for everybody to participate and talk and come together as a community, even if we don't agree necessarily on everything. The whole point is to talk about these things, including the curriculum. And I look forward to having more open discussions with everybody here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments.
Sorry, thank you, everyone. I do have to leave now, but I know this is being recorded, so I'll be able to see the rest of the comments. Thank you.
Thank you again for being with us in your presentation. Look forward to future discussions.
Thank you. I do as well.
Hey, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening. My name is Kevin Lyden, 80 Orchard Street, National Park here, and thank you for having us.
Can you just repeat your name one more time? so we can-
Kevin Lyden, 80 Orchard. And I kind of wish you would have been, but it's either. I know we had said she had said for the 6th or 8th grade, we're going to define types of sex and sexual behaviors, which I'm all for, absolutely. Because I work in infectious disease, specialize in infectious disease, and I'm very heavily involved in the communities that we're discussing and the communities of concern that we're talking about here. My primary thing is the SDI proponent. I want everybody to have a clear understanding of how they're doing, what the kids are doing, and that. I think it's important. I want to know what age where it's really going to get into that. While we normalize things and while we discuss different behaviors, the prevalence of disease is remarkable. And I think because we're so far behind in good sexual health right now in practice, as HIV ticks up, and especially in certain populations, how syphilis is actually rampant and nobody's talking about these things. The great place to start is in the youth, and I think it's an incredibly important thing to bring up. And we're also heavily involved in transgender and gender affirmative care. We're one of the primary places in Jersey that take care of that. And the actual mental and emotional concerns that come along with that as well. I think those are things you want to talk. My point of what I'm saying is basically, I want the truths to be discussed, as well as I understand the ideals. We want everything to be all happy-go-lucky, everything like that. But there's a lot of real truths that I think need to be discussed as well. And as long as they come to light, I think you'll have a much more fair and even balanced conversation. And that's where the kids are going to find the real education in this, And that's how we can actually start making some of these changes in these affected, especially certain communities. The numbers are astounding. And you don't hear about that, And especially in the minority communities, it's remarkable. And as that comes to light, if we can get that to light, then change can happen. If we just want things, wanting things isn't going to get us where we want to go. So I think allowing that truth to come out is the main thing what I want here. And that's how we're going to promote good sexual health. And it absolutely starts in the youth. So, there's a lot of great points here that I love hearing discussed. And I think there are very age appropriate and many I liked how the breakdown came. But let's not hide the realities. That's what I'm getting at. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for your comments, sir.
So you can see me.
Good evening.
Good evening, Maria Escobar, 80 Orchard Street. Okay, so I came in a little late, but she was talking about we want our kids to always be happy. That's not reality. If we don't teach our kids, and I'm sure that's what we're teaching them, SEL, then we're not being true to them, because children are not always going to be happy. And none of you are always going to be happy, because that's not how we learn. That's not how we grow. That's not how we develop as human beings. So I think that it's important to deal with those emotional sides of teaching sex education. And I think that through the SEL program, I think that's great. So I just wanted to clarify that we're not all happy, and that's not how we grow. So another thing that I was a little confused about is there's school facts and parent values. I think that there can be a connection between facts and values when we come together. Bringing her in again and actually advertising it to the community will be a great idea, because if it wasn't for the Facebook pages that we put together, many of us, really a lot of people would not be informed. And it's not a good look for our education system because it just seems like you're just kind of sweeping things under the rug without the parents really knowing about it. So that's another thing. She's not here to answer, but okay. I think it's great that we're teaching our kids acceptance of anyone. And as another parent mentioned, disabilities. I think it's important to teach the acceptance of disabilities. People are all different. My daughter broke a leg on a Barbie. The tangled Barbie did not end up in the trash. I told her, we keep her. If you lose a leg, I'm not throwing you in the trash. That's not how we work. We value each other. Mom, is that a boy or girl? I don't know, sweetie. Maybe it's a boy. He likes to have long hair. Your brother has long hair. We're all made different. I don't think that we have to be specific about LGBTQ. I think we just have to be accepting. And I think that's the most important thing that we should be teaching our children. Now, as much as we're trying to promote the LGBTQ community, and I embrace that, I think that we all should embrace our genders. I am a woman. My daughter knows that I have breasts. Why does mommy have breasts? Because I feed you with them. I give you milk, and she understands that. Why does my brother have a penis? Because he's a boy and he was born with it. Daddy, he has a role in our home. Daddy works. Mommy doesn't work. What's my role? But my job is to make sure that they are safe, make sure that they are in a healthy environment, good education, that I provide for them a meal, that I make sure I run a place where they're not always happy, maybe, because it's not perfect, but where they are learning to grow to be good people, not just for themselves, but for our communities. So I think it's important to embrace the fact that we are women and there are men. So I think it's something that we should also teach them amongst the sexual behaviors or sexualities of who we are as human beings and how we are created. We can't always explain everything, but we could be accepting of everything and teach them how to handle adversity. I think that's what's most important, not your gender, not your color, not what you look like. My children don't describe people by the big person, the person with the black hair. No, they describe it by, oh, they're wearing a red shirt. They're wearing white pants. It's not, what they look like is not important. Their sexual orientation is not important. It's how they value people. And I think that we're forgetting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss, for your comments. Nancy, do we have anybody we have to promote?
Ms. Raftery?
Good evening, Ingrid Raftery, 54 Euclid Avenue. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I listened to Taz, her presentation. It all sounded actually very wonderful. All the things I heard 30 years ago. I worked in pediatrics for 30 years. So I've been exposed to lots of different issues. Also raised my own daughter and now have a granddaughter and grandsons. But I'm a bit upset that no questions by her were answered. I quite don't understand why we have this presentation. Well, it was very general, but no answers can be. And by form, I'm sorry. First of all, that takes very long. Second of all, you know, when you type something, you might not get the information back that you really want to be answered by. To me, that's copping out tonight. But anyway, there's nothing I can do about. Also, I'm a firm believer that everything starts at home. So we should have parents' night. And no, we don't need tasks there, Dr. Haynes. I'm very sorry to say that. But you can invite a local pediatrician, a local adolescents pediatrician, who gladly would come and speak about what's important to talk to your children about. I understand not all parents are the same. Some have issues talking about just body parts. I get all of that. But in reality, it does stay at home, and parents need to wake up and take responsibility. If they need help, the help's been out there. The help's always been out there. I understand, some parents might be afraid to reach out and I don't know how, but it's there. When there are certain warning signs that you can pick up in school from a young age, maybe parents need to be approached in a proper way and say, what can we do for you? Where can we send you to? Do you need to speak to a counselor? My granddaughter from 2 years old goes to a pediatrician. She's 15 now, soon to be 16. When she has a checkup, every visit, I'm asked, please step out. I have a conversation with her. Those are important conversations. I think she learns more and asks more questions in those conversations than she does at home. But even as uncomfortable, just like Dr. Martinez said, we know what we have to talk about, and sometimes we stumble around a little bit, but it's brought up at home. I'm a firm believer in respecting all people. Doesn't matter about their race, their sexual orientation, or whatever else they stand for. But people also need to realize you have your own values at home, and us parents have a right to teach those values. Now, certain things that might be approached in your curriculum, I might not agree with, but I don't want my granddaughter to come home and tell me about something and might be even confused about it because it doesn't agree with my values. And therefore, I would like to see what is the curriculum, who is writing it, who is teaching it, and how qualified is the teacher. Also, I'm a bit concerned. I know a lot of teachers, I'm open always. I ask questions when I meet somebody, sometimes in a supermarket, off the record. And I sometimes get the feeling not all teachers are comfortable teaching what they might be expected to teach. How will the school handle that? What information is giving? We're in July, school starts in September. When will the teaching start? I really would like to know that. Also, what about the regular curriculum? I'm very much into math, history, science, biology, all these important classes. So they're college bound if they want to go, or high qualified trade schools, whatever your child chooses to go to. That's important to me, that these children get the right help now, academically. And I'm not against sex education at all, but it needs to be done in the proper manner. Pornography in this country has double standards. We turn on our television. What do we see? TV shows with double standards, commercials with double standards. All of a sudden, we see, I work in the health profession, we see HIV commercials. Pop this pill and you're wonderful. No, that's not the truth. That's a fantasy. That might help, but the person in reality who's HIV positive or has AIDS, yes, that helps. But those commercials are as confusing as they can be. So we need to be careful what we teach our children and how we present things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss, for your comments. Good evening, Miss. Just need your name and address, please.
Mariana, and my address is 388 Main Street. I just want to confirm a couple things because there are people online asking. The curriculum has not been finalized, correct?
Correct.
So you're still working on it. You are looking for the public to get involved. So if you do want to be part of the committee, we just email you and you take our information down?
I'll be publishing that in collaboration with Mr. Raimonde's department near the end of August, and we'll post that on the website as an open invitation for the public to come.
So it's just a discussion. It's not an actual committee who's working with the teachers to set up the curriculum.
It will be a review of the curriculum and input from parents.
So even at that point, at the end of August, it's still not finalized because you're still looking for input.
In August, we'll be looking for input.
Okay. Looking for input. I know one of the slides said that if a student wanted to opt out, they would not be penalized. And there is some disagreement on whether or not the school would be penalized for not actually teaching the curriculum the way that the state wants it to be taught. Is that something that you guys can elaborate on?
That's a question that I'll put on the website.
I'm sorry, what?
That's a question that I'll put on the question and answer post on the website.
Okay, I just want to make sure that like, how are we scaling this back to make the parents feel comfortable with what is being taught, where it's not where that book about the queer, gender queer is being taught. There's gotta be some middle ground where the parents are gonna be comfortable with what is being taught to my second grader about masturbation.
Just to confirm, I don't think that book is part of a curriculum. What Mrs. Schmidt was clearly saying was, how do we keep it out of the library?
How do we keep it out of the library? That's my
something-
question.
Well, okay, that would be something we will look into.
At the end of August.
No, this has nothing to do with the curriculum, miss.
Okay, because isn't that part of the
No,
inclusion
Our
in?
library is a nationally renowned library. It follows whatever new books come out. Okay,
Thank you.
okay. We will take more questions in that website.
Thank you, guys. Jay Sean Sadler, 139 Overpeck Avenue. I just wanted to respond. I needed to respond to something another parent came up and said that the standards are somehow promoting the LGBTQ community. And I wanted to make a clear distinction, having read the standards. I don't see anywhere where there's a promotion of the LGBTQ community. I believe what's being spoken about in the standards is, educating folks about people's genders or people's sexuality, different ways that people identify, and the purpose of it, as I saw even in the presentation, was to prevent bullying. So it's really about not promoting one community or any other community. It's about protecting all communities and making sure that everyone feels valued and feels respected, affirmed, and appreciated, in the community where they go to school. And as the presentation showed, it was research. I didn't see exactly what the research citation was, but in my own personal experience, which again is anecdotal, it is true that when you have a community of people together who all feel welcome, it helps everyone. It raises everyone's grades. It helps everyone to feel safe and unified and connected. And I think that that's very important. There was another statement made. I don't believe that Ms. Weisberger was saying that everyone has to be happy. I think it was just about creating, clearly, we're all going to experience adversity. We're all going to experience times that we feel sad. We're going to have conflicts, things that make us feel unhappy. But the whole point is to create conditions under which people can feel safe at the very least. Another statement that was made that I really wanted to address was the comment was, "We are women, they are men," with reference to trans women and trans men. I just wanted to be clear about that. So for me, myself, my own personal value is I believe, no, I'm not saying that you are trying to offend anyone. I'm sorry. Okay, so for people listening online, there's someone who's kind of speaking at the podium. She can't be heard. Respectfully, I just want to finish my comment. Appreciate that very much. So I don't believe that anyone came here with any malicious intent to offend anyone, not at all. I'm just responding to what I heard. But with regard, I want to be clear. So my personal value is that trans men are men and trans women are women. I understand that not everyone shares that value. What was made clear, through the standards is that the schools are here to teach facts, right? You learn your values at home. So folks certainly have the prerogative to teach whatever values they happen to espouse to their own children at home. That's okay. What the standards require schools to do is to teach the facts. And I think that that's an important distinction for the community to be able to understand as we engage, the development of curriculum. The last thing I wanted to make a statement on is there was a reference to, it's really amounted to the idea of colorblindness. It was kind of like, we don't have to learn about people who identify this way or people who identify that way. People are kind of people, and we just see them, we describe them as whatever they wear or whatever the case is. I think that colorblindness and that kind of idea is actually harmful. I believe that if you don't see people's identities, you don't see them. It's just a reality that people from certain backgrounds are, they have differential treatment. It's what happens. There's tons of studies that show this. My own lived experience shows it. When people say they don't see me as a Black man, they just see me as a man, that's not helpful. If you don't see me in a racialized society as Black, then you're not seeing me. And I think that that's also a very important distinction. We have to see people, we have to recognize their identities. We have to recognize how those identities sometimes create harmful experiences for them in a society that doesn't fully accept them all the time. And we have to have those tough conversations. So I look forward to continuing having these conversations with my community members. Thank you for taking the time.
Okay, Nancy, we have somebody online.
Can I just make a couple of quick comments and observations just as I'm listening? One is that I'm really proud of the tone in this room. And I know that these topics are hot topics. We're all here because we care about the kids in the education in our society. But I've watched a lot of these meetings online and they turn into a mess. And I'm really proud of the fact that we're having discussions, we're listening, we hear you, you're listening to us. Like that's the way it really should be, because as soon as we start screaming, nobody hears anything. It just goes down a rabbit hole. So on the topic of so the tone of this meeting, I'm very happy with it. I think Ms. Rafferty said that it begins at home. I'd like to add that it ends at home. My kids have gotten good grades in their classes, which means that they learned the content that was taught, that was presented to them. But I've done a lot of unlearning when they got home. They know a lot more about Columbus than they learned here. They know a lot more about Jefferson and many other people than they learned here. And it's my job as a parent to complete that education. So I think even with this topic, if your kid comes home and says something that sounds off the wall, whether they learned it in school, they learned it online, or they learned it on their phone, it's our job as a parent to address that and say, all right, but that's not what we're doing in this house. The same way I do with a million things that my kids come home and say, so-and-so's allowed to stay out, or so-and-so's allowed to do this. And I tell them, yeah, that's not what we're going to do in this house. And so I think that this curriculum or any curriculum doesn't rob me of teaching my kids about many topics that were not on the curriculum in the school, and quite frankly, unteaching them some of the things that they were taught. So I think parents should know that they're still empowered, because if my kid comes home with some craziness, I'm going to tell him, I think that's crazy. That's not what we're going to do in this house. And I also think that knowledge is power. You know, having almost completed raising my two daughters, I know that might sound a little biased, but especially for girls, they need to know what they can say no to as much as they know what they can say yes to. And I think that teaching kids, you know, and again, we have to make sure we're age appropriate. We have to know that you know, if you're going to teach body parts to a third grader, you're not going to teach it in the same way that you do to a college, you know, whatever 12th grader or 13th grade. That biology class is going to look very different for a little kid than it does for an adult. And so I hope that nobody's teaching 3-year-olds to masturbate. That sounds a little inappropriate to me, at least. And I hope that no teachers feel really comfortable opening up a class with, today I'll teach you how to masturbate, because they're probably going to end up locked up. So you know, I think we need to facilitate this discussion and keep talking about it as we grow into this these changes. But I do want to preach that we need to keep the tone so that we can each hear each other.
Excuse me, miss, hold on. We're trying to promote people online and accepting of people coming up twice. So please, if we can keep some sort of order in our meeting, our retreat. Thank you.
Ms. Annie Malul.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ani Malul, 163 East Grand Ave in Ridgefield Park.
Good evening.
How are you? So right now, there's no ID required or age verification to view porn. There's also no age verification to create an OnlyFans account. In shop class, students are taught to change a tire, which prepares them to take a job at Jiffy Lube. So is teaching masturbation and the different types of sex teaching these students to create an OnlyFans? Is what you're promoting going to be instructional? And then my question to Taz is, what are the unintended consequences of this curriculum? In any change, you need to think of what could go wrong. So I would like to see what her resources and cited material on that are. And that's it.
Thank you for your comments. I think we're approaching our hour of public comments, correct? Last words from the superintendent, acting superintendent? Anybody else online?
I must start by echoing Dr. Martinez in that I thought this was a great discussion and exactly what it should have been. That's why the board planned this board retreat, invited an outside speaker in so we could listen to topics and discuss them as a learning community. So I, for one, am thrilled about the way the evening progressed, and I want to thank the board. I want to thank the community who showed up. I want to thank the people online. I want to thank Mr. Ramundi for showing up and being the professionals that we are in this district so that we can continue this conversation. I also want to thank some of the great ideas that came out of it, like the family night and the continued, as I said, curriculum review that will happen in early August, along with the opt-out forms that we will be discussing at that time. I'd invite everybody to look at policy 5756. Please remember that our board and our organization, and we have a policy subcommittee, we are governed by policies as an organizing community. And policy 5756 is on transgender students. It talks about definitions and terms, respecting diversity and respecting each other, and making sure that everybody feels inclusive and welcomed in our learning community. Please look at that because it is a governing document. I'd also bring up, as a transition to the closing, that when the board met last year for board goals and district goals, the board was very focused and determined on creating goal 1, and it has served this board really well. I'm going to read it again, as I always do, because in my role and in the board's role, it's important to reiterate district goals, our guiding lights, our vision that we hopefully aspire to. So goal 1 statement: all students known, included, cared for, and evolving in their self-awareness, identity, and agency. I think it speaks volumes about the discussion that we had tonight. And it continues. We build pre-K through 12 systems of support, instruction, and student opportunities to ensure that all students are known, included, and cared for, and that guide all children as they develop in their self-awareness, identity, and sense of agency. And I'd like to conclude by saying in 2 weeks, that's exactly what this board retreat continues on, with Judy Wilson as our guest speaker, leading the board through the 3 district goals to either keep those goals, goal 1, which I just reiterated, as those are affirming visions that our community is committed to and we keep them, or discussing what the 3 board goals look like for the future. I'd invite everybody here back on July 28th, 2 weeks from tonight, for that discussion on board goals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Okay.
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you for your comments. We hoping to keep the open dialogue on, especially specifically for this comment. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.